The fluorescent lights in Lab 7 were still buzzing when my key card stopped working. I am Harvey Vance, 65 years old, and I just watched 17 years of my life get handed to someone who could not tell a lithium cathode from a car battery. Julian Alden, the CEO's 31-year-old nephew, was leaning against my own workbench when he said it. He did not even bother standing up straight. He was tossing a silicon anode prototype in his palm like it was a baseball. Effective today, all intellectual property related to the Zenith Vault solid-state battery platform is being consolidated under Alden corporate ownership. Harvey, your consulting role has been terminated. We appreciate your contributions. Like I had brought donuts to a board meeting, instead of inventing the single most advanced battery technology on the planet. Zenith Vault was not just a product. It was a revolution I had built molecule by molecule over 17 long years. The energy density of my solid-state design was 3 times anything currently on the commercial market, solving the dendrite short-circuiting problem that had stumped the brightest minds in material science for 3 decades. Every major electric vehicle manufacturer on Earth was desperate to license it. The Department of Energy had even classified portions of the core research for national security purposes. There were $2.1 billion in patents, all registered under my name. And this kid in his Italian loafers and tailored suit was telling me my contributions were appreciated. The 6 engineers in the room kept their eyes glued to the floor. They were terrified of losing their jobs in the upcoming corporate transition. Not Dr. Thorne, who had co-authored 3 major academic papers with me and spent countless nights running validation tests. Not Rachel from the patent office, who had processed every single filing I had ever submitted to the federal government. Not even Jason Park, whose entire professional career existed because I had mentored him through 5 years of failed experiments until he finally got his breakthrough. They all stood there like statues, silent, avoiding my gaze. I unclipped my lab badge, the plastic clip scraping against the fabric of my shirt, and set it on the bench next to a half-finished prototype cell that still smelled like electrolyte solution. Julian watched me closely, probably expecting the usual reaction. He wanted the anger, the empty threats, maybe some tears. That was the script these corporate executives always imagine when they fire someone. Instead, I just looked him dead in the eye and asked, "Julian, did the legal team walk you through Section 14C of my original employment agreement?" His face went blank for a fraction of a second, his smug grin faltering. "Our attorneys have reviewed everything thoroughly, Harvey. The transition is clean, and the patents belong to the company. There are no loose ends." I nodded slowly, picked up my leather bag. "Then you have got absolutely nothing to worry about." I paused at the door, looked back at the laboratory I had practically lived in since I was 48 years old. I knew every scrape on the benches, every flicker of the fluorescent tubes. "Enjoy the power," I said, "but keep a close eye on your gauges. When the charge runs out, it runs out fast." Nobody in that room understood what I meant by that. That was fine. They would understand soon enough. See, back in 2009, when Alden Energy was still a 12-person startup operating out of a drafty, converted warehouse in Newark. The company's co-founder, Dr. Clara Rojas, and I had written something very specific into my employment contract. Clara was a brilliant chemist, just like me. She understood that in our industry, the person who builds the chemical formula is the formula. You cannot separate the inventor from the invention, not legally, not technically, not ethically. We called it the dead man cell protocol. It was a straightforward security concept buried deep in the technical appendices that corporate lawyers never bother to read because it was full of complex molecular specifications, state transition diagrams, and federal compliance jargon. Under federal patent law, specifically 35 U.S.C. Section 261, patent ownership transfer must be a valid, written assignment. The protocol tied my biometric authentication, retinal scan, digital signature, and my specific electrochemical methodology to every patent filing in the Federal Energy Database. Any transfer of ownership required dual verification. My explicit authorization plus confirmation from the Department of Energy's patent registry. Without both, within 72 hours of a transfer attempt, the federal system would automatically flag the patents as disputed and freeze all commercial licenses. Clara used to say something I never forgot. Chemistry does not lie, Harvey. Molecules do not care about boardroom politics. If you build the formula right, it protects itself. She had retired 3 years ago when Lawrence Alden restructured the company and pushed out everyone who remembered the startup days. Smart woman. She saw what was coming. She saw the MBAs replacing the PhDs, the investor decks replacing the research papers, the family name replacing actual merit, and she got out clean. She moved to a quiet farmhouse in Vermont and started teaching community college chemistry. She told me she would rather explain covalent bonds to fresh-faced freshmen than watch suits destroy what we had built. I drove home that evening through Newark traffic, taking the long way past the old warehouse where it all started. The building was a vape shop now, 17 years of my life, and the place where I had first crystallized the Zenith Vault compound did not even have a plaque on the wall. My apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, one converted into a private lab that I had never connected to Alden's network. That was the best decision I ever made. The equipment was modest compared to Lab 7, but everything I needed was there. My original research notebooks, backup copies of every formula iteration, and most importantly, my personal authentication terminal linked directly to the Department of Energy's patent verification system. I sat down, opened my laptop, and ran a diagnostic. The dead man cell protocol was active, humming quietly in the background like a heartbeat. The 72-hour countdown had already started the moment Julian filed the ownership transfer without my biometric confirmation. 72 hours, 3 days. That was all the time Alden Energy had left before every Zenith Vault license on Earth went dark. To pass the time, I calibrated my second-hand potentiostat and checked my old research logs. My home lab was a modest setup, mostly rebuilt equipment I had purchased from university auctions over the years. I had a custom-built glove box, a small vacuum furnace, and a gas chromatograph that smelled faintly of old ether. I ran a quick validation simulation on the nickel-rich cathode interfaces, comparing it to the Gen 4 solid electrolyte specifications. The math was flawless. The science was perfect. It was a stark contrast to Julian's world, where numbers only existed to be put into colorful pie charts for wealthy investors who did not know the difference between an anode and a cathode. At 11:47 p.m. on that first day, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Dr. Vance? The voice was young, nervous, whispered like she was hiding in a stairwell. It was Rachel from Patents. I recognized her slight Boston accent. Rachel, they have no idea, do they? About Section 14C? No, she said. I was watching the countdown timer on my screen tick past 71 hours, 14 minutes, and 33 seconds. They don't. Julian is planning a massive press conference tomorrow morning. CNBC, Bloomberg, the whole thing. He is going to announce that Alden Energy now owns Zenith Vault outright, and they are launching an exclusive partnership with 3 automakers. The stock is already up 15% on rumors. I leaned back in my chair. Then tomorrow is going to be very educational for him. Harvey, I tried to warn them, Rachel whispered. I pulled the original contract and highlighted Section 14C. Lawrence's chief counsel looked at it for 30 seconds and said it was legacy boilerplate with no enforcement mechanism. Then he literally threw it in the recycling bin. Of course he did. Corporate lawyers think anything they do not understand is irrelevant. Some of us remember, Harvey. Some of us know who actually built this. The line went dead. I sat in the dark for a while, listening to the hum of my equipment. 17 years, 4,000 experiments, 212 failed prototypes before Zenith Vault worked, 11 patents, 9 sleepless months getting the Department of Energy classification approved. And Julian Alden, who had graduated from Wharton 2 years ago with a thesis on disruptive innovation in legacy energy markets, thought he could take all of that with a boardroom vote and a handshake from his uncle. Let me tell you about Julian. The kid had never set foot in a laboratory before his uncle gave him a corner office. He had never held a beaker, never calibrated a spectrometer, never spent 3 days straight trying to figure out why a solid-state electrolyte kept degrading at high temperatures. But he could talk. He could talk for hours, synergistic value creation, paradigm-shifting market positioning, vertical integration of next-generation energy solutions. He would stand in front of investors with his perfect hair and his Harvard cufflinks and make Zenith Vault sound like something he had dreamed up over brunch. The engineers used to joke about it in the break room. We did it quietly, of course, because nobody wanted to get fired. Jason Park once said, "Julian could not change a car tire, but he could give you a 40-slide deck on the future of automotive maintenance." We all got a good laugh out of that. But nobody laughed when Julian started making personnel decisions. By 8:45 a.m. on day 2, I drove to the diner across the street from Alden's headquarters. I took a corner booth, ordered black coffee, and watched the front entrance of the glass tower through the window. Lawrence Alden had built that tower 5 years ago when the Zenith Vault contract started bringing in real money. My technology paid for every square foot of that tower, and now they had locked me out of it. The TV above the counter was tuned to CNBC. At exactly 9 a.m., Julian appeared on screen. He was standing behind a podium with the Alden Energy logo projected 20 feet tall behind him. Navy suit, red tie, American flag pin on his lapel. The whole performance. "Today marks a historic milestone for Alden Energy," he announced, his voice steady, his smile practiced. "We are proud to confirm full corporate ownership of the Zenith Vault solid-state battery platform, the most advanced energy storage technology in the world. This technology will power the next generation of American electric vehicles, secure our national energy grid, and cement Alden's position as the global leader in clean energy innovation." I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and appropriate. "Under Alden leadership, Zenith Vault will reach its full commercial potential," Julian continued. "We are announcing exclusive partnerships with 3 major automakers and a $4.7 billion manufacturing expansion. This is what happens when visionary leadership meets groundbreaking technology." Visionary leadership. The kid had been in the energy industry for exactly 23 months. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Alden Energy stock surges 22% on Zenith Vault acquisition news. Analysts call it the deal of the decade." The waitress refilled my coffee. "You work over there?" she asked, nodding toward the tower. "Used to," I said. "A long time ago." By 2:30 p.m. on day 2, the messages started coming. Former colleagues, mostly younger engineers who had worked in my lab over the years, were texting me. "Is it true you signed everything over? Julian is telling everyone he co-developed Zenith Vault. We all know that is insane. Harvey, what is going on?" I did not respond to any of them. In 41 hours, the answers would be self-evident. At 7 p.m. that evening, an invitation arrived by courier. It was a heavy cream envelope embossed with the Alden crest, a celebration of innovation honoring the Zenith Vault legacy. Black tie, the Summit Club, downtown. It was Lawrence Alden's favorite spot. Wood-paneled walls, leather chairs, $500 steaks, the kind of place where fortunes get made and people get forgotten over dessert. Legacy. They kept using that word like I was already dead. I wore my one good suit, dark charcoal, white shirt, no tie. If you are going to watch someone dig their own grave, you should at least be comfortable. Julian met me at the entrance like we were old friends. "Harvey, I am genuinely glad you are here. After all, you were—" He paused, searching for the right condescending word. "Instrumental in the early development work." Early development work. "I invented the entire technology." "Appreciate the invitation," I said. "It is nice to be remembered." The dining room seated 22 people. Julian sat at the head of the table, naturally. Lawrence was to his right, looking like a man who had just bought his nephew the world's most expensive toy. The new legal team, 4 of them, none older than 35, all wearing watches that cost more than my car, were scattered around the table like palace guards. They spoke in rapid-fire legal jargon, talking about patents and assets as if they were trading baseball cards. There were a few board members I recognized, and a couple of investor representatives pretending to be friends. Among them was Mr. Davis, a senior partner from the venture capital firm that had led Alden's latest funding round. He leaned across the table during the appetizers and looked at me. "Harvey, we are very excited about the scaling potential. How long do you estimate it will take to transition the Gen 4 solid-state line to full commercial output?" I took a slow bite of my salad, feeling the eyes of the table drift toward me. "Well, Mr. Davis," I said, "solid-state manufacturing isn't like assembling consumer electronics. The electrolyte sintering process requires temperature control within zero point 0.5 degrees Celsius at roughly 800 degrees, and the mechanical pressure required to prevent interface delamination during cycling is about 5 megapascals. If your line engineers don't calibrate the roll-to-roll press exactly to those specs, the entire batch will short-circuit within 10 cycles. Morse Davis blinked, looking completely lost, and turned his head toward Julian. Julian cleared his throat quickly, his face flushing. Yes, well, we have developed automated compliance models to handle those technical details, Julian muttered, waving his hand dismissively. I took a seat near the middle of the table where I could see everyone's face clearly. The wine was a 2015 Bordeaux, probably $800 a bottle. Lawrence stood first, glass raised with the practiced elegance of a man who had never been told no. To innovation, he declared, to family, and to the Alden name carrying American energy into the future. Everyone drank. I lifted my glass but kept it at my lips without sipping. Julian stood next, beaming. He looked like a kid on Christmas morning, which was fairly accurate given that someone had just handed him $2.1 billion in stolen patents. Tonight is not just about business, he said. It is about legacy. Zenith Vault represents 17 years of research. And now, he looked directly at me, it represents the future of Alden Energy. Fully integrated, fully ours, fully ours. I set down my fork. Integration is the tricky part, I said, keeping my voice casual. Solid-state chemistry is sensitive stuff. You want to make sure all your federal certifications are current before you start manufacturing. The Department of Energy does not mess around with energy patents, especially the classified ones. A few people shifted in their seats. Julian's smile tightened by a fraction. Our legal team has handled all compliance requirements, he said, but I heard the slight crack in his confidence. Good, I said, cutting a piece of my steak. Just make sure your authentication protocols are squared away before the 72-hour window closes. Under 35 U.S.C. Section 115, federal energy patents have strict inventor declaration requirements. If the true inventor's biometric verification lapses, the assignment is legally void. It becomes void ab initio, and the government takes security control of the registry. I said it the same way you would remind someone to check their tire pressure. Friendly, casual, completely devastating if you understood what it meant. One of the junior lawyers chuckled nervously, glancing at his senior partner, but Lawrence's eyes narrowed. He was beginning to realize this was not a joke. Lawrence Alden was watching me now, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Some business instinct, the kind you develop after decades of corporate battles, was telling him something was deeply wrong. But Julian just laughed it off and steered the conversation back to stock projections. Halfway through dessert, a chocolate souffle, a server approached Julian with a phone. Mr. Alden, there is an urgent call from the Department of Energy Compliance office. The table went quiet. Julian excused himself and stepped into the hallway. I could see him through the glass door. His back stiffened, his free hand gripped the doorframe, and his head shook slowly. He was gone for exactly 7 minutes. The atmosphere in the dining room turned icy. Lawrence tried to make small talk with the lead investor, but his eyes kept darting to the glass door. The junior lawyers stopped laughing, whispering among themselves as they checked their tablets. When Julian came back, the color had completely drained from his face. He forced a smile and sat down, but he could barely focus. His eyes were wide, and his breathing was shallow. "Everything okay?" Lawrence asked, his voice low and tight. "Fine," Julian said, his voice cracking slightly. "Just a routine verification issue. Legal will handle it in the morning." But his hands were shaking when he picked up his wineglass, and he did not make another toast for the rest of the night. I stood up, folded my napkin neatly. "Thank you for dinner." It was a lovely evening. I looked around the table at the 21 people who were either complicit in stealing my life's work or too afraid to say anything about it. "Keep your phones charged tonight. Tomorrow is going to be interesting." Lawrence caught my arm as I passed. His grip was tight, his knuckles white. "Harvey, what did you do?" "I did not do anything, Lawrence. I just built my work right and I protected it well." At 11:58 p.m. Day 2, I sat on my apartment balcony watching the Newark skyline. The Alden Tower was lit up, every floor blazing. Their legal team was probably working through the night, frantically trying to understand what Section 14C actually meant. My phone rang. It was Lawrence Alden calling personally. "Harvey, let's be reasonable," Lawrence said, his voice carrying a desperate edge I had never heard before. "Whatever issue exists with the patent documentation, we can resolve it. Name your price. We can set up a new consulting contract, double your old rate, and give you a stock option package." "This is not about price, Lawrence. Everyone has a price, Harvey. A board seat? Full credit on the technology?" "We will put your name on the building," I almost laughed. "My name on a building I paid for with 17 years of my life? Generous. Then what do you want?" "I want your nephew to go on national television tomorrow morning and tell the truth. I want him to admit he never invented anything. I want him to admit he stole the work of a scientist who gave 17 years to your company. And I want a public apology, not to me, but to every engineer and researcher in that building whose work gets erased every time a suit with the right last name takes credit for things he does not understand." "That is career suicide for Julian," Lawrence said. "You are asking me to destroy my own nephew." "Lawrence, your nephew destroyed himself the moment he decided that an MBA, a family name, and a forged declaration made him an inventor. He thought he could bypass federal law. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forging my digital signature on those patent assignment documents is a felony. More importantly, under California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 15610. 30. Taking my intellectual property while using my age and consultant status to force me out constitutes elder financial abuse. Since our main operations are registered in California, that carries triple damages and attorney fees. You tried to exploit a senior scientist, and now the law is going to hold you accountable." I am just the chemistry catching up. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Lawrence breathing heavily. "Then you have until 6 a.m. to reconsider," Lawrence says. "After that, our attorneys will file an injunction. Your attorneys cannot override federal patent law, Lawrence. And they definitely cannot override the Department of Energy." I checked my watch. "You have about 6 hours. Use them wisely." At 5:52 a.m. on day 3, I was already awake. I stood at my window with a cup of coffee, watching the sky turn from black to deep blue to the first pale gold of morning. My laptop was open on the kitchen counter. The dead man cell countdown was at 0 hours, 7 minutes, and 44 seconds, and dropping. At exactly 6 a.m., the 72-hour window closed. I did not need to be inside the Alden building to know what happened, but I could see it. I literally watched it from my apartment window a mile away. The tower's lights flickered once, twice, and then every single floor went dark simultaneously. It was not a power outage. It was something much more precise. The dead man cell protocol had fully activated. Every Zenith Vault patent in the federal database was now flagged as disputed. Every commercial license, the automaker partnerships, the grid storage contracts, and the military applications were automatically suspended pending verification. Every system running on Zenith Vault technology received the same message: license revoked. Federal verification failed. Authorized patent holder Dr. Harvey Vance. The ripple effect was immediate and devastating. The 3 major automakers had production lines built entirely around Zenith Vault battery specifications. When the licenses froze, their assembly systems triggered automatic safety shutdowns. You cannot manufacture batteries with disputed patent status, not with Department of Energy oversight. Then the grid storage contracts went dark. Then the military applications. Within 20 minutes, the Department of Energy had issued an emergency compliance order. Within 30 minutes, the SEC had frozen all Alden Energy stock trading pending investigation. Within an hour, FBI agents were pulling into the Alden headquarters parking lot. My phone exploded with calls from reporters, former colleagues, and patent attorneys. Lawrence Alden called 4 times in a row. I answered on the 5th call. "Harvey, for God's sake, everything is shutting down," Lawrence shouted. "The automakers are threatening to sue. The military contracts are frozen. The FBI is here asking about securities fraud. You have to stop this." "I cannot stop it, Lawrence. The federal patent system does not have a pause button. Your nephew filed a fraudulent ownership claim and submitted a false declaration under 35 U.S.C. Section 115. That is a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. The system did what it was designed to do. This will destroy the company, Lawrence pleaded. 3,000 employees, Harvey. Think about them. I thought about them for 17 years, Lawrence. Where were they when Julian stood on national television and claimed he invented my technology? Where were they when I was escorted out of my own lab? Those 3,000 people watched your nephew steal my life's work, and nobody said a single word. Not one. There was silence on the line. Then quietly Lawrence asked, "What would it take to fix this?" "Truth," I said. "Public, complete, and permanent." By noon the story was everywhere. Every business channel, every tech blog, and every financial news outlet carried the news. Alden Energy collapses after patent fraud exposed. Stock plummets 74% before trading halt. FBI investigating CEO's nephew for securities fraud and intellectual property theft. Department of Energy revokes all Zenith Vault commercial licenses. The footage was incredible. Julian was walked out of the building by federal agents, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened, looking nothing like the confident executive who had been toasting his own genius 40 hours earlier. Lawrence announced his resignation at a hastily assembled press conference, reading from a prepared statement with the dead eyes of a man watching everything he had built evaporate. The board members scattered like roaches when the lights come on, each one suddenly remembering urgent personal matters. 8 months later, I was sitting in a new conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Delaware River. It was smaller than Alden's tower, but it was clean and honest. The nameplate on the door read Vance Energy Technologies. Maya Obi sat across from me, the junior electrochemist who had quit Alden the day after the collapse. She had shown up at my apartment with a box of research notebooks and a look that said she was not letting this technology die. She reminded me of myself at that age. Relentless, curious, and more interested in the science than the stock price. "The Department of Energy contract is finalized," Maya said, sliding a folder across the table. "It is $3.8 billion over 10 years. Next-generation solid-state batteries for the national grid, military applications, and the new electric vehicle infrastructure program. They want you, specifically you, leading the research." I opened the folder. The numbers were staggering, more than double what Zenith Vault had generated for Alden over 17 years, and this time every dollar was going to the people who actually did the work. "What about the automaker deals?" I asked. "All three want to restart their partnerships, but with us, not Alden. Their legal teams are drafting the agreements now." Maya paused, then smiled. "Oh, and Toyota called. They want to discuss a separate $1.2 joint venture for their next-generation platform. Apparently, they only want to work with the person who actually invented the technology." Imagine that. My computer chimed. It was an email from the Department of Energy with the subject line, "National Innovation Medal Nomination for Dr. Harvey Vance." The message recognized my contributions to American energy security and advanced material science. 17 years after I had first synthesized the Zenith Vault compound, in that converted warehouse in Newark, the federal government was finally acknowledging who actually deserved the credit. I forwarded the email to Dr. Clara Rojas with a one-line note. "Chemistry did not lie." Her reply came back 12 minutes later. "Never does, Harvey, never does. Proud of you." I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. Somewhere in Arizona, Julian Alden was working at his father-in-law's car dealership, learning what it felt like to earn a commission instead of inherit one. Lawrence had retreated to a golf community in Scottsdale, dodging SEC subpoenas and trying to rebuild a reputation that 17 years of someone else's genius had built for him. The Alden Tower was being converted into mixed-use apartments. The logo was already gone, replaced by a real estate developer's banner. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Maya asked, breaking the silence. That night at the Summit Club, Julian standing there with his $800 wine, toasting stolen technology, completely certain that nobody could touch him. And you just sitting there, eating your steak, knowing exactly what was coming. I smiled. "Clara Rojas told me something when I first started. Chemistry does not lie. Molecules do not care about boardroom politics. Build the formula right and it protects itself." "Did you believe her?" "I always believed her," I said. "I just hoped I would never have to prove it." Maya nodded, picked up the contract folder, and headed for the door. I will get the team started on the preliminary specs. Oh, she turned back. The Wall Street Journal wants a profile. The reporter said she wants to call it the man who owned the battery. Tell her she can call it whatever she wants, I replied, as long as she spells the name right. Maya laughed and left. I sat alone in the quiet office, watching the late afternoon light play across the river. The building was small. The team was young, and the coffee machine was terrible, but every patent on the wall had the right name on it. Every engineer in the building was there because they had earned it, and nobody was going to take credit for work they did not do, not here, not ever again. Looking back, the whole thing was never really about revenge. It was about something simpler and harder than that. It was about truth, the kind of truth that is built into the molecular structure of things, that does not bend for last names or boardroom votes or press conferences with American flag pins. Sometimes justice does not come with sirens and handcuffs. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a battery draining in the dark, invisible until the moment the lights go out. And then everyone finally sees what was powering the whole system all along. Build it right, protect it well, and when someone tries to steal what you made, trust the chemistry. It never lies.